Okay, welcome to EDD 939 Module 9, and this is our final official module for this course. You still have 1 week after this, which is just what I would consider our finals week, and so normally we'd be taking final exams or whatever, and so always during the final week of a semester I try not to have content really, because that's a chance for you to get your final projects done and papers written, and if there's anything still outstanding from the course, get that taken care of as well. And this module won't be too long, just because again we're nearing the end. We've had a lot of content, so I'll keep it a little bit brief for this. I think probably just the 2 lectures, and then that'll be it. So hopefully you have found the PowerPoint for this module on strategic leadership development. And we've been talking about this concept throughout the course, and I feel like the book from the Center for Creative Leadership in particular did a really good job of talking about leadership development and infusing that throughout the different concepts of strategic leadership. But I did want to take a little bit of time in the course to zero in and hone in on this idea. And really what I'm going to talk about is not exclusive to strategic leadership development. It really can be applied to leadership development broadly. But I do think it's important that we are developing leaders in our organizations, in our teams, in our groups, in our departments, depending on what kind of leadership role you currently have or will have in the future. It is important that we're developing future leaders and current leaders. And I should make sure, and I think I'll hit on that idea here in a little bit anyway, but not just developing leaders for the future, meaning, someday they're going to be in a leadership position, but recognizing 2 things. One, those who are in leadership positions, it's not that now that they've arrived or they've got it all figured out, or that we say, well, good luck, there should be ongoing development. But also developing current leaders, as the book does a good job of highlighting, in saying leadership is throughout the organization, and it doesn't necessarily mean you have an official administrative or management role. My hope is if you are in an official supervisory, administrative, management role, whatever kind of organizational term you want to use, my hope is that you are a leader. And at the same time, I recognize there are people who are leaders throughout our organizations who never have and never will hold an official administrative, supervisory, management position. And there's a variety of reasons why they don't. Some of them, it's their choice. I think of my dad. My dad was 30 years at the University of Nebraska here in Lincoln, and a faculty member. And he had the opportunity a few times throughout his career to become the division chair, or department chair, I think is what they call them there. And he considered it, and, it just wasn't his thing. He looked at it. We were actually just talking about it the other day again, and he said, you got to do early morning meetings, and later into the afternoon, evening meetings. That's what it kind of required there, and only got to teach like 1 class a semester, and the rest was administrative stuff. And he said, that's not what I wanted to do. And now he was very much a leader within his department and in his field, but he just chose not to. So we have leaders throughout our organization. So that's what I mean, developing current leaders as well as future leaders. So let's talk about this a little bit. And that's kind of that first idea, the importance of development. I think it's vital that we are developing our leaders in our organizations. And by the way, that to me goes all the way down to developing young people as leaders. I think that's key. We should be giving them leadership opportunities, helping them to stretch those and flex those, work those leadership muscles, if you will. And so I do think it's vitally important. This isn't just a nice to do. Now, I say that too because we're now in a little bit of an economic downturn because of COVID-19. Is it going to last a long time? We're not sure at this point. I think back to 2008 when we hit the recession. We saw it then. We saw it a little bit after 9/11 because of the impact on the economy, and that was also kind of coinciding with the dot-com burst. So we go through these economic cycles, obviously, and unfortunately, what happens sometimes is when we go into the economic downturns and things get tight and everyone needs to use a cliche, tighten their belt. A lot of times what organizations do is the first thing they cut or at least trim way back is their development budget, their training and development, continuing ed, leadership development budget. And I understand why. I mean, because we can still, if it's a difference of laying people off and not having as much or as many training classes, obviously, let's save the jobs. But as we're going to talk about, I think what happens is then as a result, they just stop doing development altogether, not realizing there's actually a way to do it that's pretty much free. And that's what we're going to talk about. So it is vitally important that we're developing leaders. So some of today's challenges that I see in regard to leadership development, one of them is that it's talked about a lot. It's discussed a lot. And so what can happen as a result of that is one thing that can happen is it becomes white noise. I don't know about you, but my wife and I sleep with a noise machine at night. It just helps drown out extra sounds. Our kids are now of an age where, we don't have to have the mom and dad ears tuned in all of the time to hear cries. They come and get us if there's a problem. Our youngest is almost 13, so we don't have to be as alert from that standpoint. And it's just white noise, right? To drown out other things. Well, that's kind of what leadership development often is today, because go to Barnes & Noble or look on Amazon and you have, I don't know, thousands probably of leadership books. And so everyone's writing about and talking about leadership and leadership development. Google leadership development courses, and they're all over the place. And so it can just become a lot of white noise, and that's a challenge. The other challenge is, I think, because it is talked about, discussed so much, there almost becomes this feeling like, so we're doing it, right? And do you know what I mean? It's almost like we convince ourselves within our organizations, well, we read these books, or I know they're there, or what happens is you don't even read the books. I bought these books, right? They're on my shelf. I got a shelf full of leadership books and leadership development books, or I buy these leadership development books and I hand them out to all my people. And so we're doing it, right? and so it's not just white noise. It's like we almost convince ourselves that we're actually doing something. I mean, I think of, and I'm not making fun, but this happens a lot, right? It's like, right after Christmas, people buy a treadmill or an elliptical or one of the new, I can't even think of it, Teledyne or something like, that's the wrong word. Anyway, the new bikes. And it's like they buy them and they sit in their living room or their bedroom or their basement, and it's almost like they convince themselves that they're exercising because they purchased the thing, right? They feel good. That's what we do with leadership development. So that's a challenge that we talk about it so much. It's also a challenge because even though we talk about it a lot, generally it's poorly done or poorly executed. And those aren't necessarily the same thing. So one part, when I say it's generally poorly done, I've been to some leadership training, some leadership development training that quite frankly was horrible. It was nothing but a bunch of platitudes and, power of positive thinking kind of stuff. And I don't know if they still do these or not, but when I was working in leadership development at State Farm, one organization would do these simulcasts, through satellite and all over the country, and they would have a full day's worth of speakers. And they have big names. I mean, Rudy Giuliani, Colin Powell, and Jack Welch, some of the real big names from politics and business and people known as leaders. And it would be a full day of these speakers. And you could go pay your fee. You go to a central location. They have them on the screen. You go all day. And we would have some folks at State Farm come to us as leadership development team. They're like, hey, would you pay for us to go over this? Because we had some budget dollar. And we're like, no, if you want to go, you can pay for it out of your department's budget. And they were always a little bit shocked. Well, why wouldn't you pay for that? And the reason is because that's not really leadership development. And I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with hearing those speakers, but they were a shot in the arm, if you will. It wasn't actual training. It's speakers, and it was kind of a rouse you up, get you excited and motivated, which there's a time and a place for that, but there's no follow-through. There's no application plan. There's no what are you going to do with this information. So it was kind of a shot in the arm, but it wasn't anything else, and that's what I mean. A lot of it's poorly done. I don't mean, again, there's not a time and a place for that, but don't call that your leadership development. Or it's poorly executed, and that's kind of that follow-through part. Sometimes we might have a really good leadership development training event within our organization, but there's no follow-through. There's no expectations on now how do we implement this. There's no, the leadership may not be engaged with it, or even if they are, they don't know how. How do we implement these things? So that's a challenge. And then that third challenge is kind of what I've already talked about a little bit, even in my examples. Too often what happens is leadership development is relegated simply or exclusively to the classroom. And so we have a leadership development or a leadership training event, and that's all it is. And we walk away and we go, well, wasn't that great? And it may be. The content may be excellent. But where's the follow-through? Where's the follow-up? And or what I mentioned earlier about when things get a little tight financially, this is the kind of stuff that can get cut because there's a real dollar amount that is attached to a classroom training event. There's costs for materials. Depending on your organization, there may be costs for travel. A lot of times there's costs for the space, because a lot of times we want to do these offsite, or you may not have a space you can do it. There's costs involved a lot of times for food. Usually there's food involved. Food is a way to keep trainees happy, right? But anyway, so there's costs. Sometimes you bring in, you don't have to, but you bring in external people to do some of this. So there's an actual dollar amount, dollar figure attached to classroom training. And so when things are tight, we'll eliminate that. And then we go, oh man, well, I guess we can't do leadership development. And we're forgetting, and we're going to talk about this in the next lecture, we forget that there is a whole world of leadership development opportunities beyond the walls of the classroom. In fact, I would argue that there's a much better world of leadership development available outside of the walls of the classroom. And so that's one of our challenges. And then a fourth challenge there is that little attention is given to mentoring and coaching in regard to leadership development. And so we're not connecting younger leaders, and I don't necessarily just mean age younger, but not as experienced. So we're not connecting younger leaders with more experienced leaders and helping them grow. Or if we do, it's more, hey, you should have a mentor. And so we leave the person to kind of fumble around and find someone and say, well, will you be my mentor? And a lot of times the mentor's like, sure, I don't know what that means, but okay. And so then it's like, well, I guess we'll get together for coffee every now and then, but there's no plan, there's no structure. The mentor doesn't know how to really mentor this person. The mentee is like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be asking. I just, and there's a lot of information out there talking about the value of mentoring relationships. But what doesn't happen is, especially within organizations, is how do we maximize the mentoring relationship, both the mentor and mentee? How do we do this? So little attention is given to that, and little attention is given to coaching. I'm a big fan of coaching. I actually have a certification in coaching, business coaching. And coaching and mentoring are two not completely separate different things. They can go together, but you can be a coach without being a mentor, and you can be a mentor without being a coach. Coaching, just so that you know what I'm talking about, is helping the other individual to find the right path, the right step forward, to make the right choices for themselves. But my job as the coach is primarily to help facilitate that process. And so I do that a lot through asking insightful and open-ended questions. And the value of a coach, too, a lot of times is like with small business coaching. What we say is, the guy I learned a lot from, his kind of selling line to a small business owner was always, listen, I understand, because he had been a small business owner. He said, I understand where you're coming from. He said, you're worried about your business. It's weighing you down. You can't talk to your employees about it. Your spouse is sick and tired of hearing about it. And so you need to talk to someone and talk through these issues to help think through there. And that's where a coach can come in. They can be a sounding board for ideas. And there's also usually some subject matter expertise that goes with a coach. And so they also offer ideas. But often a coach they can be someone outside, a coach can be inside. But little attention in organizations, especially for leadership development, is given to either one. There's a growing awareness and attention to these things, but still a significant lack of training in those areas. So what do we do? Then the next slide, just continuing with some of the challenges. So some other challenges that I see, and these are more ongoing. These have been around for a while. The others have as well, but these especially have been. One challenge with leadership development is that in our organizations, we only develop a select few. So we identify the high potential leadership development people, and then those are the ones that we pour all of the time and energy and effort into, and we only develop those individuals. And that is a significant challenge and problem. And I'm going to talk more about that in the next lecture. But one of the ways, or one of the reasons that's a challenge or a problem is a lot of times your super high potentials are also the ones who other companies are looking at. And they may come in and if you'll allow me to use the term, they'll poach them from you. And so now you've invested a lot of time and money and energy into this individual, and they get swept up, and all of that training development you did for them now goes to benefit another company, maybe a competitor. And so there's a challenge there. There's also a challenge because sometimes, because of the pressure, and I'm going to mention this in a second, they can wash out. So there's a real challenge with that. Another challenge is the superstar or rock star mentality, and that goes with the first one, when we only develop a select few. So we pick our superstars, we pick our high performance potentials, and what happens is they come to believe their own press releases, if you will. And I've seen this happen. They're told so much, well, you're a high potential person, and we're investing all this in you. And they get this superstar, rock star mentality. And all of a sudden now, in their employee surveys from their teams, as well as from their peers, as well as from their superiors, now the feedback is, you're an arrogant jerk, or, you need to work on humility, and you're so full of yourself. Or they think that they can't fail. And some of this is because we've never left them in a position long enough to see the results of their own actions, back to kind of that long-term thinking and things like that. And so they don't see that they fail. They've never witnessed their own failures. And so they just keep moving up. And then it's like, hey, I'm awesome. And then the first time they're confronted with failure and or negative feedback about their performance, it rocks their world. And so this is a real challenge. Or that pressure for short-term wins. And this is true in a lot of our organizations. And this is where strategic leadership comes in, right? We're trying to both think strategically, yes, short-term, but especially long-term. And there's a real pressure in all of our organizations. Businesses get beat up for this. For-profit businesses, especially, ones with stockholders, they get beat up a lot for this. Well, all they care about is the short term. And I'm not saying that's not true about them, but I would argue I've seen this in higher ed settings as well, where we only look short term. We're only thinking about the short term wins too often. And so it can be a real challenge as well. So we get that pressure, and then when there's that pressure for short-term wins, anyone who's in a leadership or we're developing them as a leader, it's you got to get it, and we're not developing them, and we're not developing their long-term thinking, particularly their strategic thinking. And then the final challenge that I see is just the overall frenetic and frantic pace that goes with life today and business. And you know what I mean by business, just doing our business in our different organizations, how we conduct our business. And so we have the frenetic and frantic pace. And what goes with that then is we don't take the time to develop people. And so, I think of it this way, as a parent, when my kids, and even still sometimes now, but especially when they were little, it was a whole lot easier. And when I'm busy, it's a lot easier for me to just do the dishes myself, or to clean their room myself, or to pick up their toys myself, because I want it done. I want things to look neat, and let's just get it done. Or even tying their shoes, right? We need to go somewhere, and Daddy, I can't get my shoe tied. Right, I'll just do it myself. And so what happens is the frenetic and frantic pace means they're not learning what they're supposed to be learning. It takes time to teach a child how to tie their shoe. And it can be very trying to your patience. It takes time to work with them and teach them how to be responsible around the house and take care of picking up toys and cleaning and things like that. All of those things take time. And it takes time to develop other people as leaders. Apologize for that. It takes time to develop other people as leaders. And so we don't want to take the time, or we don't feel like we can take the time. And so the frenetic and frantic pace. We'll talk more about how we develop others then in the next lecture. So kind of leaving it on a little bit of a negative note on this one, but we'll pick up there in the next lecture and talk about how we actually develop others.